OpenSUSE Tumbleweed, why Linux is not ready for the desktop. Now with a title like that, you might assume that I'm gonna tear this thing to pieces. But it's actually not true, it's the opposite. I love OpenSUSE Tumbleweed. OpenSUSE Tumbleweed does a lot of things really well, and it fills in others spectacularly. This is probably the most spectacular distro that I've tried, both for good and bad reasons. So this video will serve as a showcase why I like it, why I don't like it, and what I think they should improve upon, and I will be criticizing OpenSUSE Tumbleweed to what I consider the Windows standard. The Windows standard is something that I describe as easy to use out of the box with sane defaults while being very customizable for the experts. So easy to use out of the box would be something like Manjaro or Ubuntu, where you just follow the standard installer and you will get a reasonably working system with sane defaults that has a browser working, that has codecs working, that has a partition scheme that makes sense, and just a relatively easy GUI installer to follow. And that is probably the reason why I've always used Ubuntu ever since that I started using Linux alongside my Windows computer. But Ubuntu is not very suitable for the business environment at all. It does not have any proper central management tools, it cannot join a domain by default, and you will have to find different tools in order to get that to work. And for my personal use at home, I really like newer packages, and Ubuntu can be lacking behind at times, forcing me to use PPAs to get the latest ones, and they're not always available. And with my background as a Windows system administrator, I have every right to like OpenSUSE Tumbleweed because it is aimed at me, so I will be a bit biased in favor of OpenSUSE Tumbleweed despite the title. So the question then becomes, is OpenSUSE Tumbleweed easy to install, and is it easy to customize for professionals? And the answer is no. It is not easy to install, and it lacks customization features for professionals. However, I see a distro that's trying to do both of those things. And they're missing the mark at times, but I see massive potential, and that is why I wanted to make this video. And while in this video I'll be simulating a business environment in VirtualBox, I have run this at my home PC, on my gaming computer, and on my Lenovo laptop. And the end result I got on both of those was really good, I really liked it. So let's dive into it. The first experience of the user actually does not begin on this screen, it begins on this one. This is the website of OpenSUSE, it's the front page, it tells you a little bit about the tools that they have, their news, and how to contribute to the project, and it presents you with two flavors. Tumbleweed, which is what we will be looking at this video, and the more stable, slower release Leap, that's more suitable for a business environment. Now, my criticism about the business environment will apply to both of these things, because it has nothing to do with package stability, and it is more about the management tools and the options that you get, and in that case, Tumbleweed is the better criticism because they will have the latest tools available to me rather than Leap, which might lag behind some of my aspects. So the first thing that you will see once you click Install Tumbleweed is the screen that you saw before. This has the installation media, a virtualization environment, and a live disk. Now this is not the right way to handle it according to my ease of use philosophy. A new user will expect a live CD so they can test out your distribution. So that's also what I have done. I first went to the live CD and I tested it in a virtual environment and I saw if I liked it or not. So the virtual environment, live CD, is this screen. This is the live environment that you get, and it's reasonable enough, but as the page warns, it may not have every package or driver available to you, and that shows. This is what for all means and purposes a limited installer. And that is weird to me, because on a live disk I expect the standard default options from your environment. So every package that you would get by default in the KDE version of your distro, I want to see on the live CD. I want to be able to click install and open up your installer, follow the default installer instructions without any internet connection and be able to get the full experience of the flavor that I selected on the page. So I want every KDE package that you install by default on this disk, because that's user-friendly to a user. I expect my final install to be the same as the live CD. For example, if I don't like certain packages and I see that they're not available here, or if I miss certain packages that might be available, I want to be able to see that here. I want to follow this guide and have the exact same end result if I do not choose to modify your setup, and that's not an experience that you're providing to me. If you choose to install OpenSUSE from the live CD, it's gonna do an internet repository search and it's gonna download extra packages and slightly different settings, at least because these packages are included. And that means that ultimately you do not get a one-to-one copy that you might expect from other distros like Manjaro or Ubuntu, and that's something to look out for. So now I've switched to a blank VM and the installer is booting up for the first time. This is a blank hard disk for ease of use, but it will obviously work on existing hardware as well, but it might be a little bit tricky because of reasons we're gonna get into a little bit later. So the installer is almost finished loading, and that means that we have to talk about the first criticism I have of OpenSUSE in this installer menu. That is the fact that on my laptop in this version, the touchpad driver does not work. I had to install everything through a keyboard, and if I hadn't tried the live CD prior to that, I would have thought that you lacked the driver and I would just have immediately tossed your distro out the window. And that is amplified by the message that you have on your live CD. You say that you have limited package and driver selection, so you cannot be considered an accurate reflection as to whether Tumbleweed will work on your hardware or not. That could prompt the user to first try the installation disk, which lacks even more drivers on the install menu, and that means that they will get the wrong impression of the drivers available on your distro. Please fix this and have every driver available on the live CD image, but also on the DVD drive image. Because system administrators can work their way around most installer GUIs, I will be criticizing your installer from the perspective of a novice end user. So let's dive in. We first, of course, begin by selecting the language and keyboard layout. Everything is fine so far. So we click Next. We get to a system analysis. It asks if I like online repositories. Now, an end user should click yes. For my purpose and demonstration, I'm going to click no. And this presents with a very nice screen for the full installer disk. I like this very much. I understand that on a live CD you should default to just the one that you downloaded, but I like the fact that I have every option available to me on one disk and that I can use server and a desktop environment of my choice without having to download different installer images. Because I'm a KDE guy and I will just use what I'm most familiar with and what I like the best, I'm going to choose for KDE Plasma in this review. And now we get to your petitioner. I just don't like it. The defaults that you are proposing are well enough. Not everything will work well with ButterFS. There are solutions like Dropbox that only get ext4, which might bite a new user in the end, but the benefits that you gain are very clear to me. The fact that you can do snapshotting will be a godsend on a rolling distro. So for Tumbleweed, I absolutely understand this practice. For Leap, I might have chosen ext4. So let's try the guided setup and see what we can get out of this. It asks me if I want LVM or not, and I want disk encryption for this demonstration, at least to show you what kind of options it would offer. So if I enter a disk encryption password and I click Next, it's gonna warn me that my password that I use for the demonstration is based on a dictionary word. And that's a really good practice because it's gonna discourage users from using bad passwords like I have in this demonstration. Now it asks if I want to change the file system type, which makes it easy to put it on ext4. So far everything is still pretty great. I can also create a separate home partition if I like that better, and I can choose if I want a swap partition or not. But there's one option missing there, and that is if I want an encrypted boot partition or if I don't want an encrypted boot partition. On my systems, I tend to have the experience that a encrypted boot partition is both uglier in booting, but also much slower in booting than an unencrypted boot partition. I understand why you make this choice by default for security reasons, and I can applaud you for that. However, I would like the checkbox to uncheck the boot partition encryption. So for a unencrypted boot partition box, I would like it to create a separate boot partition that is ext4, roughly 500 megabytes in size, and then has the encryption only at my main system partition. The expert petitioner is where I start to really dislike this experience. I can start with the current proposal or my existing partitions, which is nice. I'm gonna start with the existing partition, so I have a blank canvas. And this is the screen that you are being brought into, and this is just not user-friendly at all. I understand the term expert petitioner, but I would have rather had something that is more resembling of gparted, where you have the GUI partition layout and you can just click the partitions into place as you see fit, rather than all these drop-down menus. So let's say we want to make that unencrypted boot partition setup that I was talking about earlier. We will have to select the hard drive that we are about to partition. In this case, it is a blank drive that's never been initiated. It's equal to a drive that I would want to format wholeheartedly. So I'm going to choose a new partition table, and I'm going to choose GPT and click Next. Now I can go to the Partitions tab, where I can start creating my partitions. And here I would much rather have had a GUI style partitioner like gparted, where I can just drag and drop and click the partitions into place, rather than having to specify the file formats manually. But because that is lacking, let's do it manually. So the first partition that I'm going to make is going to be a boot partition. It shall be an 8 megabyte boot partition. This is also not something that you can have done for you with easy wizards. It's either it chooses everything or it chooses absolutely nothing, and because I choose expert partitioning, I'll have to do all these things myself and take a peek at the proposals to see what kind of things I'm supposed to create. So the first thing is the raw volume, and it's going to be the BIOS boot partition. This gives us a normal regular boot partition, but it's not the kind of boot partition that I was talking about. The second partition I'm going to create is my actual boot partition. Like I said, I want roughly 500 megabytes in size. I want a regular data partition. It shall be an ext4 partition, and I'm going to mount this as /boot. So now it's time for the system partition. I'm going to add the partition with a custom size because I still want some space left for swap. I'm going to give it about 5 gigs because it's the easiest to select for the demonstration and it's plenty. This shall be my operating system role. ButterFS is fine, snapshots are fine, and the mount point is fine. So these defaults are pretty good, but I do want encryption on this one. Now it's going to prompt me for the encryption password. And it finally leaves me some opportunity to create the 5 gigabit swap partition. That is the steps that I have to go through to create the partition table that I liked, and that's not to mention any Windows partition resizing. That would just been a nightmare to do on a dual boot system, and I opted to just partition them in Windows instead. So now we have the new proposal with my partition settings, and we click Next. It's going to synchronize the time with the time server. And now I can click my time zone. As you might have heard by my accent, I'm in the Netherlands, which I somehow managed to click in one go without really trying. This is the Create New User screen. Now for my encrypted partition, I like these defaults. However, automatic login is always enabled for everyone, and that's a really crazy default for a new user. Why is automatic login enabled by default if you have things like firewalls enabled by default as well? That just makes a very confusing design decision, and because encryption is on, this is a fine default, but really for everyone else who did not check encryption in the step beforehand, have that off by default because you're going to get intruders in your laptop. For the purpose of this business network, I'm going to create the account local, which is supposed to be a local support account in case they cannot connect to the domain. And it shall also be my root password account. Once again, it warns me that the password is too simple because I used it on the encryption as well. But this is, once again, a very nice feature, preventing me to use simple passwords as my administrator account password. So this is the proposal that the installer automatically came up with. If you click on any of these categories, you will be taken to a screen to customize them further, but the defaults will do for me. The only one that I find really strange is the firewall will be enabled. The reason I find the firewall by default strange is because you also had auto login by default, which means that you're not consistent between security and ease of use. This one, unfortunately, is not easy for the user at all. And that is because you ship it both with a confusing GUI to manage it with, but also with poor defaults that, for example, block KDE Connect. And KDE Connect works with pairing requests, which means that it will be secure until the user clicks the accept button manually. But you cannot get the pairing request because the firewall blocks it by default, and the interface to get that enabled is clunky and well hidden. So having this on by default will be too much compromise for the average user. They're gonna run into issues that they're not expecting, blame your distro and toss it aside. While an administrator like me can easily just click the enable button here and have it going. I understand that you want to protect them from harm, but until you have a better management for them, it's gonna do more harm than good. So on my laptop, which is already sitting behind the router firewall, I have disabled the firewall for ease of use. However, to show you why it's an annoyance later, I will keep it enabled for now. It will finally prompt me to confirm everything that is just listed, and when I click install, the installer kicks off. Now this installer is not a generic I copy one system image over installer. It's going to install all the packages one by one, and this is going to allow them to do very frequent ISO updates that are essentially daily. The ISOs can be generated very quickly this way, which means that they can provide ISOs often, and you can see that by the media name, which is very recent, and there's already new images available. This does make the install experience a little bit slower, but I think it's definitely worth the compromise. So this brings us to the boot screen, which is currently a bit fancier than the default. This is how it would look like if you choose to replicate my own partition layout without a encrypted boot partition. So I can log into this, and it will start loading. If you have a UEFI VM or computer, it will also show your vendor logo, which is very fancy. So now we are at the OpenSUSE KDE desktop, which will start criticizing from the end user perspective. After all, we're still at pretty much default installation defaults. So the first thing we're going to look at is the update icon. As you can see, there's already a lot of packages available, and this is about a week old ISO. That says something about the update frequency, which for a rolling distro is very nice. You get very frequent updates, and that's one of the reasons why I like it so much. But this also immediately touches upon something that I do not like. It says that I have to run a terminal command to manually update installed packages. Why is this not a button, and why is this not done through Discover like any other distro? After all, KDE is one of your primary desktop environments, and you don't have this basic functionality implemented. Now here's what makes that extra weird. If I go to Discover manually, then you will see that it is capable of fetching the updates as well. And this list will eventually populate with the installed packages, with the updates available. So the update functionality with the GUI is there, and also using the standard KDE means, yet they've taken the button that opens Discover out of this updater icon. And that's just, once again, very strange. So a time later, we're now at the populated list, and I can click the Update All button. But for this demonstration, I'm not going to do that because I want to touch on the command line updaters. So with console package management, they've actually done a few things really clever, but other things really badly. Let's start with a clever one. And that is the fact that they have gotten something that is very nice if you have a lot of Ubuntu scripts laying around. They actually have an alias for apt, so I can do apt install glances if I, for example, want a nice terminal task manager. So it's going to say that glances is not found in the package names, so it's going to try something else. In this distro, it's Python 3 glances, but the name I expected from Ubuntu works anyway. And very reminiscent of this installer is that you always get multiple options. If things break, it will also propose multiple different solutions, and it will be very clear in telling you which ones it will install. I'm going to not install this just yet, because I want to show you the correct command. The correct command is of course sudo zipper in and then glances. It's going to produce the exact same result, but it's using the proper command, and not all OpenSUSE distros will have apt available, but the fact that the official one does is really nice. But there's also things that are not so nice about it. I expect this to work, sudo apt auto remove. Auto remove is supposed to check which dependencies are no longer necessary and delete them from your system. That is something Zypper cannot do. It's not just an apt alias problem, that's actually missing from their options entirely, and that gives them minus points because I now get a bloated system without an easy option to just remove all the packages. I understand there are options to uninstall software and older old packages, but sometimes updates install them as well, and it's just never completely clean. I experienced that at Gecko Linux, where Gecko Linux installed newer versions like LLVM 8, but didn't remove LLVM 6. So this would have been a reason for me to ditch your distro, because I like proper package management from the terminal and I like a nice clean system. However, I found a solution to this, which I integrated into my own update script, which is something we'll touch upon in a moment. This here is my auto maintenance script that I have running every half hour on my own devices. As you can see, it does a full distro update, but it also has a special rm command that I found on a forum. This is exactly what I expect the auto remove command to do, so the capability is there, but there's no command for it. You guys should be relatively safe in adding this, however the OpenSUSE guys do warn that unneeded is not always accurate. If that is still a true statement, you guys desperately need to fix this because that's essential in cleaning up a bloated system, especially on an end-user system where you might not know what they have installed and just need a quick way to clean it up. With this in place, you get a relatively standard KDE distro. Everything works really nicely and it's always up to date. With this in place, I also don't have to worry about package management, and it makes it a very easy distro, which is why it's sad that the automated updates are not a feature by default. For system administrators on the network, this is an absolutely essential feature because we cannot manage all the updates on 300 devices manually. This is absolutely a feature that should be on your installer screen and turned on by default. It will make it a lot easier for system administrators and novice users to manage the systems, and it will also be easy enough to disable for people who do not like automated updates. It's a feature that I haven't found anywhere so far, and I think it would fit OpenSUSE very greatly. It would ensure that the end users are up to date without the system administrators having to do it manually, while novice users don't have to worry about package management either. The script will just do it for you. And that is the first point why I titled this video Why Linux is Not Ready for the Desktop. Any mainstream operating system gets out of the way of its user base and updates automatically without you having to worry about it unless you specifically tell it not to. And there is another thing that I really dislike about OpenSUSE out of the box, especially for home users that are just beginners to Linux. And that is the fact that codecs are not installed by default. So let's take a look at OpenSUSE package management, how to get codecs working in an easy method, and how you can enjoy a proper VLC setup. This brings us to SUSE's biggest asset, and that is Yast. Yast is phenomenal, and Yast is the reason why I wanted to try OpenSUSE to begin with. Especially the option Create New Directory Server and Windows Domain Membership got my eye because I'm a Windows System Administrator. Up top we have all the options, so we can update things online, we can manage the software, and we can add a repository. Now, the Vlc Codecs, the easiest way I've found is by adding a different repository to the system. Here's all the default ones, and they allow some easy additions as well. I can do this by community repositories. And this is great. Here's the 3 community repositories that you would probably want to use. This is Pacman. This is the DVD encryption for DVD support with DVD encryption on the DVD. And this is also where NVIDIA users can get their graphics drivers. I will check this, but it's a VM, so I'm not actually going to install them, but I want to show you the packages, which ones to use, and how to install them. So first we add the repositories that I've just selected. It's going to ask you to trust them, which I'll do. It's gonna give you the information for each one. And then as that finishes up, here's the selection again. You can choose if it needs to refresh automatically and if they're enabled at the time. Which then brings us back here, and we can go to software management. This is basically very similar to the Synaptics package manager, and that's what I really like about Yast. It has all those advanced tools available at the spot. For the NVIDIA users, you want to search for NVIDIA, and then you have the different driver versions here. Use GL04 for the really old cards, use GL05 for the new cards. However, if you have a laptop, you want to go for SUSE Prime instead. This will give you a command line option that allows you to toggle between NVIDIA and Intel. I haven't found a GUI yet, but I also didn't really look for it. Back to the codecs. This one is easy. Just type Vlc Codec. You will see the Vlc Codecs option. Check it. And now it's going to propose a few different solutions, because some of these packages are not available in Tumbleweed, but they are available in Pacman's repository that we've just added. Zypper in the console will do the same thing. It's going to prompt for the same options and allow you to choose 1, 2, or 3. So in this case, we want to change the versions to the Pacman repository, and we want to continue with the installation. We're going to have to do this for a lot of them, but I do like the fact that it actually tells me, and it doesn't just break the system by default. For the codecs, it's completely fine to just choose 1 on all these options. I haven't found anything that broke because of it. And now we can accept it and apply the changes. It's gonna tell you what it's also going to install to get them working. And we're going to continue. The installer is now done, and you can now use the proper codecs on your OpenSUSE installation. However, this is yet another criticism in your installer. Why is this checkbox not there, and why is it off by default? Any other distro that I've tried recently has codecs on the disk, and this allows the end user that's less experienced with Linux to use their multimedia without wondering why all the errors are happening. Another peculiar thing is that the file thumbnail previews FFmpeg is actually installed by default, but because the codecs are lacking, the previews are not working. So if you're wondering why the KDE previews are not working, it's probably because you haven't installed all the correct codecs yet, just as FFmpeg will not do despite the name. Remember the criticism that I had about the firewall? Let's show you why. The firewall is also in Yes, just like most of the other advanced features. So if we go to the module, we now have this interface with a lot of different zones, and these are totally not clear to me. What do these mean? What is home? What is internal? What is public? What is trusted? What is work? This is awful for a novice user, and even now I cannot remember on top of my head where the proper settings were. I assume we need external access, and to get KDE Connect working as the example, we're going to find KDE Connect and we're going to add it here. But I might have to do the same thing for home, because here's even more things. But how do I define the home network? Do we do that here? Here's the default zone, but I don't see a default zone here. So yeah, like I said, the firewall for a novice user is gonna be a nightmare, which is why I recommend it to be completely revamped, better defaults, and otherwise the option turned off on the installer. This is an absolutely awful end user experience, however, administrators will probably like the advanced features that you offer. Add an easier GUI, allow this one to be accessed for the experts on the system, and then everyone will be happy. And this also concludes my review from the end user perspective. If you just want to use OpenSUSE on your computer and you like the latest packages, you should now have a little bit of a grasp what to expect. There's really cool things like configuring the bootloader right from YAST. It has the latest packages available, but the install is not very easy compared to other distributions that have a better install experience. The live CD is not great to say the least. But this video is also titled Why Windows is Better for Linux in an Office Environment, or Why Linux is Not Ready on the Desktop. So we're going to go a step further, and I'm going to compare this version of SUSE Linux to a Windows experience for getting a normal SMB Office out of the box. I'm going to show you exactly what is missing and hint the OpenSUSE devs what needs to be improved upon. So if you're interested in the system administrator side of things, keep watching. So as you may notice when I was recording this, I'm actually recording in a Windows environment. It's just what I'm used to, and it's what my recording setup works best on. In the background, all this time I've had a router, and I've had a Windows server. The Windows server is already running Active Directory. However, let's take a look how easy this is to set up. I already had to do that because the router is pre-configured to use the DNS server of this server, and if I had done it from blank beforehand, the installer of SUSE would have failed because my internet would not have worked properly. But first, let's pretend that the Windows server does not exist yet, and I want to create an Active Directory server or a Linux equivalent in the Linux environment. I assume that has to be done with New Directory Server, so I'm going to click on that. This is something that other distributions do not have, and it's a massive advantage for OpenSUSE. If it was actually convenient to use, and I actually had an idea how to use it. I am a Windows certified professional, however, I have no idea how some of these things are supposed to be done in this screen. I couldn't find a proper tutorial, and there doesn't seem to be any proper way to generate the certificates on the machine where Windows does this for me. I haven't even bothered continuing at this point. I first wanted to see if the SUSE Linux version could function as a proper domain client. So let's focus on that first. So the fully qualified domain name, if you want to set this up, is clear enough. I can specify video.lan here. The directory server instance name would, for example, be video. The directory suffix would be video.lan. And the directory manager would be LAN. This is the password for it, which also makes sense. But these certificates I've never had to generate before. That might be somewhere hidden in the GUI, I may have to get one somewhere else, I may have to use terminal commands. Why can it not just do this for me when I entered everything else? I do not understand why this has to be so difficult. So I've set my Windows VM to a point where only the hostname and the DNS settings are set. So let's do the same in the Windows environment. To do this, I click on Manage, and I'm going to add the roles and feature of a domain controller. It's neat that I did not have to do this on SUSE, however this version works a lot better, so it's not really a win for them. I specify that I want the Active Directory domain services, and I'm going to click the Add Features button, so it automatically adds all the features that I need. It's just next, next, next from here, and I'm going to click Install. It's now going to install the required roles and features. So it's a little bit later and the install has been finished, and there's this text, promote the server to domain controller. They could have been a lot more clear about that link, but oh well. It's not really a criticism about Windows in this one. We don't have anything yet, so I'm going to create a new forest, and I'm going to call it video.lan. Now we have to specify the forest and domain functional levels. Normally you'd leave this default unless you have older systems on your network. Because I did not test which ones are required for OpenSUSE, I'll lower it to 2008 just to be safe. And I'm going to specify my passwords that are required. I'm not going to create any DNS delegations. The NetBIOS domain name is automatically generated, but can be customized if you desire. The default paths are fine, but can be customized if you desire as well. Here's a final review screen. It's now going to check if everything is installed. And it's going to notice that I did not install the DNS server. It needs a local DNS server in order to function. The one from the router will not do. It's going to note this, but it's going to automatically correct this for me and install the DNS server with the correct settings. And now click Install, and that's basically all I had to do to create a basic Windows domain. As you can see, unlike the OpenSUSE screen, I did not have to specify much details at all. All I had to do was specify the functional level, which I cannot find on this screen, and the domain name. A password for the recovery, but no other more advanced options were asked. It was able to do this on its own. Which means that out of the gate, OpenSUSE is less easy to set up than the already familiar Windows environment. And that's not going to win you any points with Windows administrators who are already unfamiliar to your interface, and the fact that I could not easily find the documentation is not helping either. If you want to be a proper server replacement for an SMB, this has to be either replaced or improved. Meanwhile, the Windows server is done, and it's going to reboot in order to get the domain up and running. So it's a little bit later, and it has finished rebooting, and I've also created a few things. First, I created an organizational unit called Video, which is going to be the base organizational unit I do everything under. It's just common practice for sysadmins to do this, because otherwise you might not be able to do organization-wide policies just as easy as you would otherwise have done. Now, in this, I'm going to have an organizational unit called Clients. This is where the Linux and Windows machines are going to eventually go in. And the watchers, which are going to be my users. I already created EnglishBob and DistroTube, and for demonstration purposes, I'm going to see how easy or hard it is to create an account for switch to Linux. So I'm going to say switched to Linux. I'm going to name it username STL. I'm going to set the password. I'm going to leave user must change password at next logon enabled, and this is now finished. But let's do a little bit more and see how our user profiles and home folders are going to behave. Normally you would want a separate partition, and especially if you can, a separate drive for this. In my case, for ease of use, I'm just gonna do it in the root of C. I'm gonna create a folder called shares. I'm gonna create a folder called home folders. And I'm going to create a folder called user profiles. I'm going to create Samba shares for this. Now, the way you create a Samba share on Windows is very easy. You don't have to install anything. You just right-click on Home Folders and I go to Properties. I go to Sharing, Advanced Sharing, Share this folder, Permissions. I check the checkbox for Change for everyone, and now I have a Samba share that anyone can access. The security permissions we access in the Security tab, which I'm going to specify specifically for home folders. I'm going to do this in the advanced settings. I'm going to disable the inheritance and remove all inherited permissions. I am going to give the administrators everything. And I'm going to get my users read permissions. That is all they need for a home folder. The home folder will automatically give them write permissions in their own home folder. For user profiles, I'm going to do it slightly different. It's a trick of mine to give them just enough permissions to create a folder, but not anything more. With this, we are going to once again go to the sharing folder. We're gonna change the folder. We're gonna go to the security tab, and we are going to disable the inheritance of the folder. Once again, I give the administrators everything. And I'm going to give the users basic read permissions. However, this time, I want the advanced permissions, and I also want them to be able to create a folder, but nothing else. I don't want any files in here, I don't want them to be sharing anything out of the context, and they cannot read any subfolders because of the permissions they will have, but they should absolutely be able to create a folder because the client will create the folder. So with that done, let's get EB his own home folder and user profile. I'm going to click on him, I'm going to go to the Profile tab, and I'm going to connect the drive view to this location. We have the home folders, and we're going to append his username, which I can do with %username%. Windows will automatically correct this to the correct username. We are also going to do this for his profile path. Now, you don't always want user profiles in your network. In fact, there's a lot of reasons why you shouldn't want them. However, in this demonstration, I want to know how Linux reacts to this. So we're going to give him both. Again, username%, apply, and everything is now set up. Now, you may have noticed it did not generate a user profile just yet, but it did create a home folder. That's because the home folder is created by the Active Directory wizard, and the user profile is created by the end user system. Back to the Linux side of things. Let's try to get this machine into the Windows network. Now, there's two ways to do this. The most advanced one is user logon management. We can go to change settings, and we can add the domain here and disable and enable allow domain user login. We can make it create home directories for the users, which is absolutely required because otherwise they'd be sharing the same one. And there's ways to map the network drives automatically. This one seems to have the most options, and a few of them I need. However, I could never get this one to work. When my users try to log in, it tells them that the user account is not permitted to log in. I assume this is because NTLM is missing, and NTLM is enabled on the network. It's not acceptable these days to have to disable NTLM for anything, so I'm not going to use this method. The second method I had more luck with. It's Windows domain membership. Don't use these ones at the same time, however, you can choose either one of them if you manage to get the other one working. This one is also more easy to use. We have to specify the domain and workgroup, which was video.lan. And I'm going to choose use SMB information for Linux authentication, which is going to allow the domain users to log in on this machine. I want them to be able to log in without the domain controller. This enables them to log in the field. And I also want their own user profile. Single sign-on for SSH could be cool, could also be a burden depending on how your network works. For the demonstration, I'm going to leave it off. I'm not going to have any directory sharing either because I want to use the domain shared drives. It's now going to prompt me to install the extra packages. I assume these are on the disk, but because the disk is not enabled as a repository source, it's going to download them online. It's a relatively fine default because that ensures that I get the latest versions. Now it asks me if I should want to join the domain video. Obviously, I'm going to click yes on this question. It now prompts me for an administrator account of the domain, so it can actually have the permissions to add itself to the domain. I log in with my domain administrator, and as you can see, the joining was successful. It now informs me that in the previous install step, I enabled automatic login. This is going to be annoying. The fact that it offers me to disable this automatic login is brilliant because that saves me the time to figure out how to do this manually. Kudos to SUSE for doing this. It's now informing me that I may need to reboot because not everything has just been processed without a reboot. I'm going to write the configuration. And we're now part of the Windows domain. This is by far the easiest, most streamlined experience I've ever had on any distro. This is a massive plus to OpenSUSE, and as you can see, Jest is fantastic for system configuration. You may recall me saying earlier in the system that it's not suitable for experts for customization, but that's actually half true. If you want to manage things locally, this is the best I've ever seen, and this is the one reason why I absolutely love OpenSUSE aside from the latest packages. It's just a breeze for the expert users, everything is at your fingertips, and it's amazing. However, now it's time for the burden of Linux as a whole. This is not just an OpenSUSE problem, this is an everyone problem. This is ultimately the reason why it's going to fill my central management thing that I require and the customization that I require. As a distro, OpenSUSE gets a pass on this. However, ultimately it still fails in the end, because my expectations are just higher than what Linux currently can provide in any distro. This is what I expect you guys to work on if you want to break through in an office environment, because without this, we simply cannot manage. I will show you now. So the first thing we're obviously going to do is the reboot that it requested of me. It's time to leave and restart. It's prompting me to restart again. If that's annoying, it's a KDE thing, you can disable it in the settings. I always do. Now we're signing in again. I just entered my encrypted password, and let's see what the install experience is actually like. So here is the local account. And this may be a limitation of KDE, but it's always just the local account. This is not good enough, guys. My users should not have to click on other before they can log in. The first time is acceptable and completely normal, but in sessions after this, it still showed me the local account in testing rather than the last signed in user, even though I opted to create them local accounts with local offline authentication. This has to be fixed. I don't blame KDE for this. You should handle the local account creation better in your scripts. Because really, my users do not want to click that button every single time and type their username and password every single time when a Windows machine would just require them to do the password. That's a massive regression that's going to frustrate them day to day. As small as it may seem, this is going to be annoying to them. So let's try it. Let's log in with DT's account. Or actually EB's account, because that's the one that we set up the home folders for. We're going to log in. And it says login failed. Let me double check the password. His password is correct, but the domain is wrong. So let's try it again. Still login failed. Now it's getting a little bit strange. But this is nothing out of the ordinary. It just locked me out though. The reason this is happening is because his password is set to be changed on the next login. And it's just not something that they support, which means that you're gonna have a lot of help desk questions. Also not acceptable, guys. Now that I've unlocked his account, and this thing has been locked, we're gonna have to restart again. Again, not acceptable. Attempt number 2. Let's try it again. So, video.lan/eb welcome01. And this time it actually worked, which proves that the password being forced changed or expired is the problem. That means that all these users with Linux are going to call in for help desk support pretty much every month. They all need the password changed. They're all going to try it a few times before it goes right or synchronized properly. They're all going to lock themselves out on that login screen. They're all going to be told to press the power button to remove the device. And it's just going to be a mess, and it's going to be massive help desk queues every month. This has to be fixed. This is absolutely unacceptable. But what experience do we now have? As you saw in the previous segment, we had a lot of pop-ups for VBox. I don't hold you accountable to this. In a real-life scenario, that would not be a problem. So I do have a home folder here. And it created a home folder in the video domain with EB. It's interesting that it does this in a separate folder for the domain users, but that's useful because then you can have duplicate names locally and on the domain without any problems ever arising. It properly set up everything, I have my own configurations, and all in all this is nice. However, where's my home folder? My home folder is not automatically mapped even though I told it to in Windows. That means that your Samba client does not automatically listen to my settings, and that once again means that the help desk will have to log in for every single user, every single first time, and create either shortcuts or scripts or automatically assign it somehow. It's just gonna be a burden in central management. This is once again completely not ready for the Office desktop. This should have been accepted from my Windows domain. So let's try going for it. Let's go to / DC01 home folders. And I have my folder here, and it did automatically sign me in. I had a test where that did not happen, but that must have been a one-off because it's clearly just working now. So when manually mapped or manually navigated to, everything works. And it works pretty nicely. So let's log out of this. And let's switch to a Windows PC to see if that file actually arrived and what kind of things we can expect from the Windows PC. Also notice how this says local again rather than EB, even though he was the last signed in user. Like I said, it does not remember the usernames. So here is a empty Windows client. It's not member of the domain yet. That's going to be the first thing that we will have to do. Microsoft has hidden the setting a little bit these days, which they get minus points for. Yes was clearly a lot easier in getting me to the correct option. But once you manage to get there, you will be able to join the domain just fine. I'm going to call this one video.land for the domain, and I'm going to call this win1. Once again, it prompts me for the domain credentials. And we're now part of the domain. It's time to restart the system, and now EB should be able to log into this computer the next time we try. Before we let him log in, let's go back to the server and simulate the password being locked or expired. I do this with user must change password at next login, which was enabled prior, which caused the Linux client to fail. We now go to the Windows client. I once again have the local account because it's the last signed in account. We go to other user. I don't have to type the domain in front here. That was required for Linux, but because it already knows I'm going to do that, I don't have to do it here. And now it prompts me that I need to change the password before the sign-in, rather than just locking me out of the system. It changes the password automatically, and we can log in. This one takes quite a while compared to the Linux experience. Linux is definitely a lot quicker in getting me set up rather than Windows. I'm gonna have to skip over this part. So now we're at the desktop. We once again have EB's account here. But as you can see, this time it automatically mapped the home folder correctly. And if I expand them, it's here as well. The file that I created on Linux is here, which indicates that the home folder was working, although it was not automatically mapped properly. As you can see, this is a massive difference already in experience between Windows and Linux. In Linux, I now have to jump to hoops to somehow get the home folders mounted automatically. In Windows, this automatically works with relatively no pain at all, and I didn't really have to specify anything. All I had to do was fill in the home folder option. Now, how about things like synchronization of, for example, my downloads? Let's make a fake download here. And let's say we don't want this annoying search button, etc., etc., etc. If I now log out of EB, and we take a look at what it did on the server side, we're going to see that he created his own user profile. I don't have access to the profile because he created it himself and administrators are locked out of it by default. However, if I claim access and break into his account, again, don't just do this because you're gonna break the user account profile. This is just for demonstration. You will see that actually a lot of settings are backed up. We have the Windows equivalent of the config folder. We have his downloads, we have his documents, etc. This is also why you don't want to back up entire user profiles, but use proper management software. The last gripe with this is that there's no proper client customization. On Windows, even though not by default, there's a lot of suites available that allow me to remote manage and deploy software and remote manage and deploy updates. On Linux, I have not found anything of the sort, which means I would have to manage all the clients manually through scripting or tools that I just simply did not encounter. It's not documented, it's not well known, and this alone is gonna get a lot of Windows enthusiasts to maybe try Linux, but ultimately switch to Windows for their own small office networks or even larger deployments. I would not be able to do what I do with Windows on Linux at this time. It could be a limit in my knowledge, but that does indicate it's not clear enough for the average Windows user to comprehend. So let's dive in a little bit into the user and client management. I can do this to group policy management. This has the same directory structure that you've seen previously when I set up my domain, and I can create a policy for all the watchers. I can do that on the watcher category, so it only applies to the people that are in it. I'm gonna call it watchers just for ease of use. I did that in a test as well, which is why I did it watchers 2 this time. Once in the screen, I can both specify it for the computer and for the user. However, this organizational unit only has users, so the above one is useless. Here I can go to the preferences, and you can see that I can specify some control panel settings. I can, for example, assign some printers here, or customize some internet settings. I could, for example, specify which homepage they should watch on, for example, BitChute. But I can do more as well. I can create drive maps, where I can assign them, based on the fact that they are watchers, department shares. So I can, for example, make a Z drive where all the watchers can share the files with each other. These will be automatically mapped by the Windows clients, but as we saw before, the Linux clients do not follow the same procedure. And then finally, there's the policies themselves, and I haven't figured out how to have this for the Linux clients. Maybe it's an option, but I just did not see a way to do this centrally. Expect things like control panel, where you can block the access to the control panel in PC settings. If I enable something like this, you would expect YAST not to work. Now, obviously, it's going to be a massive burden for the Linux community to map this to all the existing policies, and I don't expect that from you. What I'm saying with this argument is that I want a central way to configure which user can have access to what settings and what settings they should have by default. For example, KDE likes to open up all the recent programs when you start it up. I do not want this, so I would like to specify, for example, for mission-critical users that handle legal documents, to have that blocked by default, while maybe the users from the Watchers department can have it just fine. So that wraps up my thoughts on OpenSUSE. It's a fantastic distribution that does some basic things really badly. Local management is great, central management is terrible, and the default user experience is not fantastic. However, if you have the patience to learn the distro, you're gonna get a really nice end result that's very suitable for modern hardware, and that's very easy to use, at least once you got the proper packages configured. On my own systems, I'll probably keep using OpenSUSE for a while. I like the end results that I get with them, especially the newer kernel and newer packages, while everything keeps automatically updating with my script. I haven't had those updates break anything yet to my knowledge, so at least it's pretty stable and well maintained in the backend. Having Jest at my disposal for the advanced features is very nice. However, the advanced features are still pretty limited if we compare it to something that Windows Server allows me to do. I can create a basic directory server, but the setup there is not very easy, and the total features of the clients are way too limited to do anything useful with it. We need at least feature parity on this front. Everything I've shown you today is not advanced, it's the basics that every network will use. But even on Windows, the management of this can be greatly improved. If you made a distribution that had a server where I can create easy default groups for users with printers and policies assigned, and automatically configure which software and policies for the updates they will have, you have gold on your hands. Combine this with a deployment server like WDS, where you can boot from the network and everything is automatically configured on the client according to default settings, and you're at least on the level of management that Windows users would expect, but you also have a lot of room to improve on the experience that they would have on Windows. Only then can Linux ever be truly the desktop replacement, because people like my mom will just simply not switch over unless they use it at their office first. An office can force you to use something, but at home they rather have something familiar. And I think with all this behind us now for the video, you will probably see why I see so much potential in SUSE. They clearly have the intent with tools like Yast and the Windows Active Directory integration to set steps in this direction. However, they're far from there yet, but it's far further than I've seen any other distro become. I've tried similar things on Ubuntu, and you need custom proprietary clients to join in the first place, so in that sense, they have done a pretty decent job. But ultimately, it's up to the end result. Can you achieve something of similar greatness with just Ubuntu by clicking next, 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 next? Yes, you can, but the package will be a little bit older, but it saves you a lot of headaches in the process. Can you achieve something like this with Windows? Well, on the enterprise front, it's a lot easier with Windows than with Linux. On the home front, it really depends on what your use case is and which OS is better for it. I would not advise Windows users to switch to OpenSUSE just yet. It's not easy enough to have to be your first distro, but I would advise an Ubuntu user to try it, just to see if you like it. If you are a system administrator like me, OpenSUSE is definitely a must-try. And hopefully in a future version of Tumbleweed or Leap, we will be able to see a better out-of-the-box experience and especially a better live CD. One where you can just click next, 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 choose the boot encryption on or off by default, have an option for codecs that preferably is on by default, and have an option to install the NVIDIA drivers out of the box. The firewall is hopefully revamped or disabled by default. When you do this, it will be just as easy for me to recommend SUSE to someone as it would be to be Ubuntu, because then I'll know they have a decent job with the settings at the first attempt. So all in all, I think that the post-install experience of SUSE is actually fantastic. It's the pre-install process where it goes wrong, and it's also the enterprise market where they're just not ready yet. It is why I've been so motivated to make this video, to point out where the weaknesses are in case Linux developers are not familiar with the Windows thinking mindset. If there are resources that I've missed that allow me to create the experience that I seek using OpenSUSE or otherwise, please let me know in the comments, as I'd like to learn how to replicate my Windows work on Linux. For now, I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you are an OpenSUSE developer, feel free to reach out to me to discuss the subject further. Thank you for watching, and have a nice day.